I'm a professional SharePoint architect developer who's had pretty significant experience working with SharePoint branding. And honestly, people used to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars doing branding projects, right? And so the number one thing that you would hear is like, I don't want it to look like SharePoint. And I have pretty significant experience in, can everybody see my screen, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. So what you're looking at right now is a screenshot from my portfolio of an example of my past work. And it may not look like anything special, but literally thousands upon thousands of dollars went into developing this template. And so this was a product that I worked on at a previous job we called Digital Workspace. And it had responsive design, it had some customized web parts, but the idea is that I could come, do an install, and if it was uncustomized, in maybe 5 hours, I could deploy something that looked like this on your intranet. Inevitably, people would want it customized, and they would want things done to it, and they would want, other things to fit their requirements. And so these projects tend to go, even with this as a basis, these projects tend to go on for weeks, if not months. So what Microsoft has done with their modern interface or modern template is, number one, they focus, so it used to be possible, it used to be more popular, it's still possible, but it used to be more popular to deploy SharePoint as a public-facing publishing website, a branded, public-facing branded websites. Microsoft, with their modern template, has gone more of an inward-facing.
Hey, Idaho, sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I'm kind of concerned about your child. If you need to reschedule this, we could do that. I just feel bad that your baby is crying.
It's one of those things where she's tired. And
would you like this reschedule?
If it's a problem, then I think we might have to. If it's too disruptive, honestly, there's.
I'm just concerned about her welfare. That's all.
She's fine. It's a thing where she didn't get enough sleep at night.
Okay. Well, at any time, if you need to just stop, let us know. Your baby's more important than this session.
Right. I appreciate the concern. It's my wife is working with her right now. Okay. And honestly, I don't know that I would add much more to that.
Okay.
So, and she seems to have calmed down a little bit.
Yeah, let us know if you need time. So, yep, I'll let you keep going.
Yeah. So Microsoft, with the transition to SharePoint Online and being more intranet focused, they've introduced the modern framework, and you have the ability to do customization, but it's much easier now than it ever has been to build great-looking SharePoint websites out of the box with SharePoint Online. So we've constantly heard the term, we want to see out of the box. We want to see, we want to keep everything out of the box, keep everything out of the box. My experience is typically people say that and then immediately ask for features that aren't possible out of the box. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through 2 ways to build a crisis management intranet site. And so one of the benefits of doing it this way is if you have, depending on how you're set up, if you have people on your internal Active Directory AD joined to your domain, when they log on, your intranet sites are searchable from Bing. And so in their normal day, in their normal searching, whatever, your internal content will surface for them when they're using the internet, as well as having a way to publish things internally, right? So I'm going to go, and I have, so are you guys seeing my personal SharePoint Online tenant right now?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just curious because I have a Word document, and let me be clear, right? Like, this isn't my original content. I borrowed this from Microsoft. Somebody within Microsoft put out some great content, and I'm just presenting it to you here with a little bit of my own spin. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time walking you through the process of building this manually, which, while it's not minutes necessarily, or I mean, it's pretty quick, but it's faster than hiring a professional developer like me to build something like a digital workspace. So the first thing first is you would go into your SharePoint Online tenant under Layouts 15 SharePoint.aspx. And one of the ways to get here is if you go to Office, you can use the waffle menu to just click SharePoint, like so. That'll bring you here. Or if you open up office.com and you're logged in, you can also click the SharePoint icon here. So once you're in SharePoint, go ahead and click Create Site. We're going to create a communication site. And I'm just going to call this Crisis Demo. Keep the defaults. English is my language. Going to go ahead and click Finish. Okay. So already we have something. Already we have something that's a pretty decent looking, pretty attractive layout. And this is different from the public. And so typically in the past, we would have used the publishing framework. We would have used the publishing templates to do our branding. So already I feel like we're ahead of the game. So next we're going to work on our layout. And so I think I might have already messed up though. Did I choose the topic design? You know what? I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to kill this real quick. I don't remember if I clicked the topic design. I'm going to go delete this guy real quick. And I want to make sure that I use the topic design. Yeah, okay. Topic design is the default. All right. So you want to make sure to choose the topic design when you're creating your communication site. The next thing you're going to do, is you're going to make sure that you get your layout correct. So we're going to feature a pretty prominent, hero layout. We're going to feature a pretty prominent hero image, as well as some other web parts. And I apologize if this is tedious. I'm reading from my directions just to make sure I get this right. Go ahead.
So did you say this is inward facing or is it outward facing?
This is inward facing.
Okay.
This is for the intranet. So so the idea is that this is for the members of your organization, whether they be employees or whatnot. And so for people to see this, they're going to have to be able to log into your SharePoint tenant.
All right, thank you.
Right. Thanks for the question. I appreciate it. So next thing is you are going to go and choose. So I clicked edit. And now I'm going to go and modify the layout. So we're going to change the section layout to a, hang on. Let me rearrange my notes real quick. That's better. All right. I need to change this to a,
Man, Idaho, sounds like your daughter's really smart, spunky, and just, you know, really fun kid. You're going to have to bring her onto the camera here and show everybody.
I think she's normally, when I'm on camera, she's normally my, in the back, I have a family picture as my background.
Sounds really cute.
So I want to lay out with the hero image and hover your mouse below the title area. We've got our section layout. And for some reason in my notes, I can't find in the notes what layout I'm supposed to be in. Let's see. I think this is the right layout.
So from a big picture perspective, Idaho, it doesn't sound like you would pick the layout at the very beginning, kind of like you pick communication site. You would pick the communication site and then you would kind of retroactively point to a lookbook template.
Well, so this is the first part of the demo. So I'm actually going to go to the lookbook in the second part of the demo. So essentially what I'm showing you right now is the hard way. So this is what you have to do if you don't use the lookbook, essentially. So if you're building the site manually, you come in, you create the site, you choose the layout, which I can't for the life of me find in my notes suddenly. I apologize for stumbling. I'm going to move on. All right, so now we're going to change images. So first of all, we're going to get rid of this image and go with our designated hero. So let's delete this. And for now, not the link I wanted. All right, so for now, we'll use, this is our link. Then we're going to change this image. And so you can see in the hero web part, it automatically chose our background image for us. And I use the meetup link here. And going left to right, top down, the crisis management uses So actually, let's change this guy. And you can do a lot of things with this. I'm going to go with a single tile here, and I'm going to change the image to one I had before, just to show you that you can. Background image. Let me choose my custom image. All right. So, and you can change the focus, the focal point in the image a little. But I'm going to leave that as it is. And so, next thing I'm going to do, let's go ahead and get rid of the other web parts. Let's add a and I'm not going to worry about the layout as much since I can't find that place in my notes, but I'm just going to go ahead and add a text web part. And we're going to do some lorem ipsum. And so now we have some sample text. Next, I'm going to add a quick links web part. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with SharePoint publishing or the classic version of SharePoint, but classic version of SharePoint, it should be pretty obvious by now how different the layout is from modern layout and how different the experience is of adding web parts. So I'm going to go ahead and add some links in our quick links web part, disa.mil. And so our crisis web part today is going to be more focused on IT crises. So I'm going to be adding some IT links just from links that I had before. And feel free if you have questions to stop me. I have a tendency to talk fast and kind of elide things. So if there's something you don't understand, you don't get, please let me know. And finally, I'm going to add the Azure status link. All right, so now we have our quick links. And so I'm going to skip over the Yammer conversations part of the instructions because I don't have Yammer on this tenant. But you would probably on a crisis website, you would probably want some place to collaborate, to have some sort of real-time conversations. And this is a little bit of this demo was probably conceived of a while back when Yammer was more of a thing. So I'm going to add a news web part. And this can suck in news from around your your SharePoint site. And it's possible to set up by selecting sites. It's possible to filter the content, and I'm just going to do some minor configuration here. And I'm going to add a Twitter part. Do we have Twitter? Yes. And let's edit this guy to add some relevant content here. So continuing with our theme of let's go ahead and add a couple. Let's see. And let's add one on Azure support. All right. You know what? Let's surface that in front of our other friend here. Right. So, and then for a crisis website, you would probably want a list of people to contact. And why don't I just add myself here? Right. And so here is a manually built crisis website. And we built it using the modern framework. It looks pretty decent. I mean, it could probably use some help with the layout, but in around 15 minutes, it's probably the best that we can do ourselves. Does anybody have any questions before I go forward with the lookbook?
I think you deserve an applause just for that. Wow, it looks great. It's talking out to the internet, and it was fast.
And I mean, and it's not to say that you couldn't do things like this with SharePoint publishing, but it was probably harder. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so, I mean, there was more fiddly bits. It probably didn't look as good out of the box. It was harder to modify the layout, things like that. And so, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to move forward with using the lookbook to build a crisis website. Oh, and I didn't do the other thing that I dropped. I forgot to do the, so one of the big things that is actually kind of exciting about the modern framework for SharePoint branding that I skipped over, that I can go back and cover if anybody has any questions, is SharePoint actually has a built-in mega menu. And it'll be in right. But I'm going to go ahead and use a lookbook to create a crisis management site. And literally just wait for the email to let me know that my crisis management site is ready. So provisioning is started. I'm going to go to my SharePoint home of my SharePoint tenant. And I've done this a couple times. I'm waiting for the email, but while we wait for that, and it'll be here any second, while we wait for that, let me show you one that I've done previously. So this is what a finished crisis management site looks like when you do it using the lookbook. So you can see all the elements here, right? So here's our text web part, here's news, here are the people, there's some Twitter links. This is where the Yammer feed would go. And honestly, creating this site is just a push of the button. And so there's some customization that needs to happen, right? And so you probably want to modify things. Here's a mega menu. You probably want to modify things to have your own content here. But out of the box, in 5 minutes, by pushing a button, this is what the crisis management website looks like. And I'm monitoring my email to see when I get the email from Microsoft that that the site I provisioned is ready. And so one of the caveats that I'm going to add here is, number one, you have to have permission to create sites in your tenant, right? And so in my own tenant, I am a tenant administrator, right? There's literally nothing that I cannot do, to use a double negative. If you're an end user, you're going to have to talk to your tenant administrator about getting permission to be able to do that. And I just got word from, let me share what the email looks like. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second and share the email that I received from Microsoft saying that my provision site is ready. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
That's what the email from Microsoft looks like when they've created when the lookbook has provisioned the site that you requested. And here's a handy link. You click open your site. And I'm going to switch sharing to that. Can y'all see now?
Yes.
And so honestly, of the two methods of creating a site, I much prefer using the lookbook as a template, right? And so how things used to work in the past, especially with publishing, is that your tenant administrator could either go to a third party and download templates, or you could hire a developer to build, like me, to build a template to build out your intranet. With the lookbook, there are a number of pre-built templates blessed by Microsoft that are attractive, that are fast, that give you a great starting point to build out a site rapidly. And then from there, right, like you add your own content, you add your own news, you can change the logo, modify the menu, Can everybody see? Can everybody see the see me editing the mega menu on the left here?
Yep.
And you know what? I'm going to change. I'm going to add our other crisis management site here. And you can audience target it. And I'm just going to take the first one I get, since I didn't pre-create any audiences for this demo. And so now, under home, I'm going to save that. And where did it go to? Oh, let's add it under awareness. There we go. Yeah. So now, let it redraw the menu. We've added our link. We've updated the mega menu. Not sure what's going on there, but it is relatively easy to modify this mega menu to have your own links, to have your own stuff here. And I'm going to open the floor to questions. And CL, do you want me to do the second demo I have in reserve of the SharePoint spaces?
Yeah, you got time. You got till 1:30.
Okay. So before I move on to that demo, does anybody have any questions about the lookbook and crisis crisis management site? And I don't know, like, I mean, I just want to stress how much of an improvement this is over the old experience. So it used to take weeks upon weeks of custom development of all this stuff, thousands of dollars to get out a working, pretty SharePoint site. And now, and I mean, in a way, I'm kind of jealous, right? Because I used to slave, I mean, I personally used to be in charge of projects like this, of delivering these things. And just, I mean, just having a Twitter web part ready to go out of the box is kind of a huge deal.
So how recent is this update?
So the original demo for the crisis management web part came out, I believe, in March 2020. The SharePoint framework, the modern framework, has been around, I believe, since 2015, 2016, maybe. And in terms of customization for stuff like that, I think SPFX has been around the same time. So 4 or 5 years. It's just, I mean, with the most organizations, their upgrade cycle is long enough that a lot of people just haven't seen it. So, okay. I mean, there's a lot of people who, you know, when they think SharePoint is like, okay, it's going to look like SharePoint, or it's going to look, you know, like SharePoint publishing. and we're going to have to hire a designer. We're going to have to hire a developer. We're going to have to do all this heavy lifting to get anything that looks reasonable that I want to present to my users. And that's not the case.
Okay, and in terms of the user access and user publishing, perhaps, how can you control what your users can be able to put onto the website?
So, and you might have seen that I popped up the share button. And so SharePoint comes with 3 basic classes of permission. And so SharePoint permission is basically infinitely customizable, but the 3 most useful ways to manage that are you specify site owners. I created the site and I'm a tenant administrator, so I would automatically be considered a site owner. The majority of the time, because SharePoint's a collaboration platform, you probably want the people within your organization who are relevant to the sites to be site members. That gives them the ability to add content, to delete content, and to view content. I think there's some, there's some other things, but at a high level, that's what they're going to be able to do. And then the 3rd class is site visitors, right? And so site visitors are people who are read-only.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are people who they get a link to the site, they look at it, and that's it. They can't change anything, they can't delete, they can't really interact with it at all. But they can look at content. Now, the other thing, so this is the other thing about SharePoint, right, where you can kind of get yourself into trouble. So everything in SharePoint is broken down into individual permissions in a lot of ways. So you can go and tinker with your permissions and say, give somebody like, hey, this person has the ability to edit layouts. This person has, you can create custom SharePoint permissions, groups, classes. The terminology escapes me right now. But one of the things that I've done in the past in terms of governance was giving people the ability to edit and to create, but not to delete. The idea is that you want to save on support calls where somebody's like, yo, my content's been deleted and I need to recover it.
Okay.
And so literally any SharePoint permission that you want to imagine exists and you can add it, but I would urge you whenever possible for speed's sake to keep it simple. If you have specialized needs, go to town. Just be very thoughtful of why you're doing this and what you're trying to accomplish. Chances are there's a way out of the box that will save you a lot of headache, a lot of, support calls, a lot of having to jump through hoops. Does that make sense?
It does.
Is there anything else? Are there any other questions? Is there anything else people want me to cover?
This is Brent Jackson. I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Up at the top, that mega menu that you demonstrated, is that a feature that's turned on with this template, or do you have to do something to configure it that way? I like the drop-down portion.
So so this is built with something called the Pnp Provisioning platform, Pnp Provisioning service. So you can provision custom features. You can provision almost anything you want to, right? Like web parts, features, and actually let's dive into that. So, because I do notice that out of the box, there is not a mega menu on every site. So the way you would go and check, and so you can see the site logo here if that's something you want to change, site description. The SharePoint also has something called hub sites, but we're not going to get into that right now. And
well, actually, let me back up a second. the Pnp provisioning that you're talking about, is that a service that's delivered with standard SharePoint 365, or is that something that has to be added?
So, okay, so I have to be careful, right? Because I'm a SharePoint developer, and if you let me, I will wax poetic about custom features that end users don't necessarily want to know about or care about, whatever. But the Pnp provisioning is, Pnp stands for the patterns and practices. And so Microsoft has shifted to this model. Instead of everything being closed source, custom developed, being open source and providing the code to the community with them being the primary developers. And so that said, Microsoft, to drive best practices, to make sure people are doing the right things the right way, they have a patterns and practice group that publishes open source libraries to help us do things. And so one of the things that they put out there is the Pnp provisioning template or framework. I can't think of it. But so the specific Pnp provisioning service is something that Microsoft hosts in Azure that uses Pnp, the Pnp provisioning library, to create sites, to create content in your SharePoint tenant. From a developer standpoint, the Pnp provisioning tools are custom tools that allow me to build my own templates.
Do you know if, because you mentioned it's in Azure, so is this something that you have to have an Azure account to use, or will it work in SharePoint without Azure?
So literally the beauty of SharePoint Online is it's just SharePoint. It's just SharePoint hosted by Microsoft. So honestly, Azure, I put it this way, Azure is the most convenient, Azure's the least friction way to host services for your SharePoint Online tenant. That said, you can host things on your own hardware. So I built custom solutions. So I personally built a line of business application that, for security's sake, the database for that line of business application actually lived in my customer's tenants, not customer's tenant, but like in their network on their own hardware using their SQL servers. And it was fronted by a GraphQL web service. And so the actual brains of the application all lived on their network behind their firewall, and you couldn't actually access the application, even though it was on SharePoint Online. You couldn't access the application correctly unless you were within the network. You would at least have to be VPN'd in. So it's definitely possible to build stuff to modify your SharePoint Online from anywhere, if that makes sense. Azure is just the most convenient way to do it. Did that answer your question, or am I being too obtuse?
Well,
or too vague?
So I'm sorry. I apologize, because I'm happy to take this offline if necessary. The thing I'm trying, so when you talk about this Pnp service, this is a service that's available. So, you have SharePoint, and you go SharePoint on Office, well, now it's Microsoft 365. So you have your Microsoft 365 account. One of the things that's available to you is SharePoint. So you can go on SharePoint, set up a site, and go to town. But what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is, in order to use this service that we're talking about, this Pnp service, I would have to set up an Azure account.
No, you don't. No, you don't. So let me be clear. No, you don't.
Thank you. No. So how would I integrate this Pnp service in my Microsoft 365 account, so I could use this to then create a site? Is it just, now I see where you are with the add-in section for SharePoint. You're saying this is where you turn this service on? So
actually, I'm going to post a link to the chat from Microsoft about how to create and adjust the mega menu.
Okay, thank you.
And this should answer all your should answer most of your questions on that. That's the most succinct way to do that. Let me see. How do I get back to the chat? Posting it there. All right.
Idaho, can you also show us how, the menu item where you went to provision the lookbook crisis site, the template, and then you had provisioned it, and then you waited for the email.
Mm.
I forgot where the menu area where you went to say, hey, Microsoft, please provision me a crisis management site.
So let me walk this back. So how I did this, can you see my screen?
Yep.
So how I did this is I went to lookbook.microsoft.com. I clicked, well, I mean, I think I clicked see examples, but you can also get there by viewing the designs. And I chose crisis communications. They have a lot of templates.
Nice.
And I mean, so they haven't thought of everything, but they've thought of a lot of things. I like the crisis communications thing because, well, it seems like, honestly, there's so many crises to choose from. So, I mean, so this was originally built with COVID-19 in mind. Since then, we've had the hack of the not FireEye, but we had the hack of SolarWinds. We had, I mean, it just seems like there's a different crisis every minute of the day, right? And so I thought that the crisis communications website was one that would resonate and is probably a needed thing in most organizations, right? Like, I mean, it would be nice, I feel like, if there was a place within my organization to say, hey, something bad happened. What do I do next? That's why I chose it. But I mean, I could have easily done a global marketing hub, conference website, sales hub, all sorts of things. And so I'm just going to go ahead and, it's easy. And so the thing that's really cool about this is it's extremely easy to use, right? So I just click through, and actually, you know what? Let's do a different one just because I'm going to do a news site. Add it to my tenant. And so you guys can see I went to lookbook.microsoft.com. I clicked view the designs on the menu, and I chose in this case, I think, did I choose a news site? Yeah. And change it to family news. You can customize it here, the URL, the name, and you add it automatic. And so the other thing that I need to remind you is you need to have permission to create sites. In my case, I'm making it look easy because I'm a tenant administrator. If you're not the tenant administrator, you're going to have to talk to your tenant administrator about getting permission to create the site or talk him into using the lookbook. And honestly, in the past, asking for a custom SharePoint site was a hard so the other thing that's great about this is in the past, asking for a custom SharePoint site was a hard conversation. You'd have to do the justification, you'd have to justify the cost, you'd have to find resources, you'd have to jump through a lot of hoops and do a lot of work. Even if you don't have permission to create the sites, honestly, in most reasonable cases, this is probably a 10-minute conversation with your tenant administrator. It's like, hey, I want this site. Send them the link. And honestly, in most administrators' cases, like, oh, it comes from Microsoft. It's out of the box. No skin off my nose. Awesome. I'm going to click provision.
And if I have a site that I already have, it's not lookbook based, maybe it's a site that I, blood, sweat, and tears created manually. Can I retroactively overlay that site with a lookbook template or a theme?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so these are for brand spanking new sites.
Yes, but because I mean, and so like I mean, and not to like if as somebody who's put a lot of work into creating sites, I understand not wanting to discard your work. That said, because of how quickly you can build and tear down with SharePoint Online and the lookbook, honestly, I would recommend just trying different templates until I get one that I wanted. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, you're right.
I would tell you to not be afraid to delete something. I mean, so maybe back up your content, right? Save it somewhere. But yeah, create, delete, go to town.
I got a quick question. This is Brent Jackson again.
Go ahead.
Thank you for sharing the lookbook.microsoft. That's wonderful. I can go check this out. But I do have a quick, so are all the templates that are located here all external look? Well, not, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong term. Are all these sites communication sites, or are there some team sites in these templates as well?
And so I'm going to, so I don't disturb I want to monitor the progress of the provisioning. So I'm going to open up a new tab, but there are, oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, I guess I did mean to do that. Why am I not getting the menu?
Well, no, you know what? Thank
There,
you.
there are, so yeah, I don't know what I just did, but there are, for some reason, okay, there's the drop down. Okay, yeah, here are team sites.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
So I'm not as familiar with those because, for one, I haven't presented those before, but there are team sites, right? And so the other thing, right, that as somebody who used to work with, actually, let me just show you the list.
You might want to be aware, you might look at team sites versus teams site.
Right.
So I mean, those are team sites, which is the old teams, not the new one. Now, Microsoft is modifying their teams, Microsoft Teams, so you can put these templates inside Teams. So their future is going to be Teams provisioning. So be careful.
I'm not sure who's talking, but you're trailing off pretty hard.
Okay, 2007. They had the Fab 40, so be aware. Those were not migratable, but Microsoft is modifying the Teams S to be able to have these sites, these templates to be put inside Teams. So the thing you pointed to before was the team site.
All right. So actually, you know what? Like, just to make sure there's no confusion, right? Let me back up and give you guys a little history. And so the list that I pulled up right here, this is a list of every out-of-the-box SharePoint site template. Most of them are not relevant to this audience, right? And so as a SharePoint developer, the sites that I used a lot was this one, the publishing portal. The team site, this guy, and there's a second publishing portal. Everybody in the Edokpayi household wants to make themselves heard today. I apologize. And let me just say, I really appreciate the patience and the lack of judgment that you guys have shown today. And I hope that this has been informative for you.
No, you're good.
So, yeah, and so there's a blank internet 0. And I think there's a second, for some reason it's not coming up when I search. There's multiple things called publishing, but really we tended to use this guy and no. There were two publishing templates that we tended to use, and for some reason I'm not finding the second. But most of you would see the team site or a publishing site. Maybe if you're an admin, you would go to the central admin site, but for the most part, you wouldn't create any of these sites yourself. And so for SharePoint Online, you still have those sites kind of in the background, but what Microsoft is kind of pushing everybody toward is, let me get back to, what Microsoft is pushing everybody toward are these two templates. You have a team site, that's collaboration. That's basically, the idea is, and honestly, so the way that most of us are gonna interact with a team site is that we're using Teams. It's possible to use Teams without SharePoint, but I would really say that it's not the best way. And this is going to redirect to my Teams app that I have here. But, or it didn't. Okay, cool. But every team that you create also has a team site behind it, as well as and this is not a Teams presentation or meeting today, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. But there's also a Outlook component to this, as well as OneDrive. So going forward, Microsoft really wants you to use either a team site or a communication site. And a lot of the time, you're not really going to create the team site. That's going to happen from Teams when you create a new team and you get a team site with it. Does that make sense? And now I've got the problem of having too many tabs open.
They've already made the announcement, though, that on Teams site, that the main menu within Teams can be a home site, a hub site, and all the infrastructure of regular team templates be hosted within a Teams site. So Teams
That's really
site,
cool.
So Teams site, they've already made the direction, they've already shown it, they've already shown demos of it, where the Teams site will be the pointer or the path of least resistance, if you want to say within Microsoft. That they would actually have your hub sites and home sites would be within Teams. And that SharePoint itself is it's just the hosting provider of Teams.
And you know, I mean, so one thing I'll say about Microsoft now is and
it probably would change in 6 months, because every 2 years, Microsoft changes their, so not necessarily this is going to be the way it is forever. So.
Yeah, so actually what I was trying to find the words to say is it's almost as if Microsoft has adopted Facebook's old motto of move fast and break things. So if you were an old school SharePoint developer and you came to SharePoint Online, there's a lot of, or even if you're just an old school SharePoint user, right? And you came to SharePoint Online, there's going to be a lot of cognitive, maybe culture shock. I can't think of the right words, but there's a lot of change, right? And they're steadily introducing new features. And I have a friend who works at Microsoft who will tell me, is like, hey, I don't know everything that's going on. I can't be your oracle I can't be your source for technology from Microsoft because they don't necessarily tell me everything. He will actually go and do demos, presentations, And during the presentation, people will raise their hands and say, hey, that's not what you're showing. Like I'm in here using it and your slides are wrong. And he'll be like, oh, they updated it right before my presentation and didn't tell me. And he works there and he presents on the stuff. And so, I mean, honestly, in a way, I really, really like this approach, right? Like, I mean, I've always been one to argue for new technology. Let's, use the latest and greatest. Let's do all this stuff. And I'm opening up the news site that we created earlier as part of the demo. And so I enjoy it, but in terms of trying to plan a business or like, make decisions, it can kind of put you in a weird place, right? So a lot of the time, I mean, so you might, if there's a feature that you're waiting for, a lot of times you can kind of get into this holding pattern. It's like, okay, I'm going to put off this project. I'm not going to do anything until this feature is ready. You know what I'm saying? And I kind of think that's the wrong answer. I mean, just with the ease of use that they're kind of introducing with the lookbook and a lot of their technology, I would say that, I mean, with SharePoint, especially with SharePoint sites, I would treat them as disposable. So, and I mean, I'm not I mean, although I am a SharePoint consultant, I think CL's had governance people on before, and so they might disagree with me. But my attitude towards governance is let people use everything and roll out the new features when they're available. It's really easy to just make a backup and copy it to a new site. Don't be married to, I mean, be completely willing to throw away your old sites and copy stuff over. But that's just me. And I will admit that, I mean, I haven't been on the business end of that. And so business people might be sitting over there horrified, shaking their heads like, no, there might be good reasons to not do that. But from a technical side, there's a lot less required investment to go with that approach.
I like your presentation. I mean, it's good. I don't want to be literally, I mean, I'm not trying to pull any rug out from under you.
No,
The list that you've shown, those STS site numbers that you've shown originally, you had like 30 templates. Many of those have been deprecated. So that's something people need to be aware of, is that when we do these migrations, these things will not migrate over to the future. And then when the Patterns and Practices team came out with the Fab 40 back in 2007, that was a great hint for people to use templates, but then those were not migratable to new versions. So that was also, a caveat that you have to be aware of when you start doing, some of these customizations when you get into migrations for the newer versions. So if somebody said, can I use this template on an existing site? My suggestion is, yes, create a new site, use the new template, and then migrate the data into the new template. And it's easiest and it's really quick. So you can, in a sense, overlay one of these templates to an existing site, but the pattern that it would follow would be create the site and then migrate the data from the old site into the new template. And it'd be quick.
So honestly, that's actually something that, I mean, so working as a SharePoint consultant, that's actually something that I'm dealing with today. And the big project that I'm working on for a client right now is redeveloping, modifying their customizations to work with SharePoint 2019 and SharePoint Online. And what I will tell you is this, right? Anything done in SharePoint Designer, don't even try. Don't do it. Don't even attempt it. As for the old site templates, right? I agree with what you said to a point. What I would tell you if you're trying to go to SharePoint Online is this: provided that you don't have any customized server-side customizations. And so that would be web parts, Visual Studio workflows, those kind of things. I would migrate first as a classic site. just to get the content into SharePoint Online, right? And then I would work on maybe writing a script, doing something to copy my content out. And so I would try to get my Word documents, my PDFs, my other stuff from SharePoint to SharePoint, from SharePoint Online to SharePoint Online. And so I'd first migrate as classic, and then I would do a second step where I try to copy the content. The pages, right now, I don't know, and I'm not going to claim to have 100% knowledge of this, so there might be a way to do this, but I'm guessing from my experience, you're probably going to have to redevelop pages. And so if you have a classic team site, it's not going to migrate to a new team. I wouldn't expect it to migrate to a new team site. There's no analog for that. What you can do is migrate it as a classic. Actually, at the root of my SharePoint site, right? So I've had my SharePoint tenant for a long time. And so when I created my SharePoint tenant, you can see that this is a modern page. Originally, this site was actually an out-of-the-box team site. And so let me see if I can find the original homepage. This was the original homepage. And that's a photo of my dear departed father. Can y'all see this?
Yep.
And so what I did is I had an out-of-the-box team site, and as kind of a lazy migration, I just created a modern site in the same pages library, and boom. I'm able to take advantage of a lot of the same abilities and features now. The modern interface. And so, there's a couple different ways to approach it, and I have some ideas on it. And I didn't get the name of the guy who's speaking just now. Who is that?
John.
John.
I think John, so was John's sentiment. I'm pretty impressed that he went back as far as the Fat 40. When they upgraded SharePoint, they said, Microsoft said, hey, no Fat 40, it's not coming with you. You're going to have to redo that. So, John got burnt before, and he's obviously thinking, hey, if I do lookbook templates, is it going to burn me again?
And so, okay, if that's an issue, if that's a question, let me answer this way. So the way Pnp provisioning works is it's a client-side provision. And so think of it like an interior decorator that you hire to decorate your house. And so Pnp provisioning is essentially somebody outside of SharePoint going and customizing your SharePoint site. And so there's no custom code actually on the site. And so theoretically, it's all out of the box, if that makes sense. And so if we look at let's see, let me get to one of my sites. So if we look at the news site, there aren't actually, oh, that's actually just news. That's what we wanted. If we look at the news site, it's modern, but it's all web parts that are out of the box web parts. Does that make sense? And so I can't guarantee you that it's going to migrate, but I would say that there's a pretty good chance that it will. I mean, if that's a fear that somebody has. I mean, was that something that we were kind of worried about, John?
No, I'm just looking at what's the future of Microsoft. So Pnp Group got their hands burnt really bad when it came out to 540. So this new architecture
and they burned everybody else too.
it's future, guaranteed supposedly, but be careful what the path of what Microsoft wants to go forward, because those original templates that you showed earlier, those are deprecated and they're not supported. So we've done like 200 migrations. I mean, over 200. I'll say like
Well,
500, I'm guessing. But that's not true migrations, but a lot of these things are site merging and stuff. Anyway, true company migrations. This is our bread and butter. So you have to be careful bringing forth old versions to new, because they're just not supported. And
yes. And on that point, I agree emphatically. And so if it wasn't clear, right, like I showed those templates to explain some of the history. If it would be an extreme, I agree with John, it would be an extremely bad idea to try to create a new site with one of the old templates. Don't do it. Please don't do it.
It's not supported, period. There's just missing parts, there's missing structures that are just not supported. There's a lot of common code that's just not supported within the framework anymore.
Right, and even to migrate it, right? Like, I mean, and so I hesitate to speak on any template or like give a, there's just too many different like little edge cases and different ways things can go wrong. But what I would hope in a lot of cases is that you can migrate the content, even though a lot of the custom web parts may be broken or some of them might be unsupported, and just be able to copy what files you need or create new pages like I did.
Yeah, the best thing is to create the new, using the LookBook templates, create the new site, and then just migrate the data from the old to the new template, and that's the way you quote-unquote modernize your sites. So modernizing, the old data, or even changing the template. You can't really change the template out from under itself. I mean, you can theoretically, when we've done it, but it's like, I wouldn't do that again. But anyway,
hey, John, you're having audio problems.
Sure. Okay, sorry. Let me speak toward the microphone. I would not recommend changing the template out from under itself. It can be done, but it's hellacious. Best thing is just create the new site with the new template and migrate the data into it.
Yeah.
I think you had a gentleman before, can I upgrade the template or change the template in flight?
Well, I mean,
theoretically it can be done, but it's hellacious.
Like, I mean, I would strongly urge people to take the path of least resistance. And the number one thing that causes resistance, in my experience in SharePoint, is clinging to an old way of doing things, an old template. And whenever possible, I would try to get people to start fresh. In fact, when doing a migration, one of the things that I would challenge organizations on is, do we actually need to move this? Can we retire the site? And that'll get rid of a lot of your problems right there. So technically I'm out of time. If nobody has any further questions, I'm going to turn it over to CL to kind of do closing statements. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this demo. I've done this a couple times before. First time with a screaming child in the background, and I really, I'm going to have to apologize to my wife because she took time out of her work day and stepped in for me. And I want to thank you guys for being an understanding audience.